That's really interesting, Alicia, what you're saying about the housing being harder to find, and the lack of HIV shelters. And then that thing of like, do I tell the counselor or not? Maybe, can you speak on that a little bit? Can we go down that path? Can you share with me like why that stigma is such that when you're in a position of like working with like, you know, toward your care with a provider that's there to, you know, supposedly help you, why is there that fear to say and to share your, you know, your status?
Sometimes there's a stigma of, were you a drug addict? Were you a prostitute? They don't want to look at you could have been a normal housewife getting the virus. They see you as a low life woman, where disease carriers be men or women, and they form opinions. There's even the opinion of you may not be educated. You may not want to work. You may just want SSI. You want that free housing. That's all you want. When in all actuality, yes, you get Section 8, but it's not free. You still are working.
Right.
When you begin to work, your rent goes up higher. But people see us as lazy people. They think we just want to get an SSI check. When all actuality, many of my peers that I started out with in the 1980s, most of us have become college educated. We either have a master's or a bachelor's. We went into working of human services. So we didn't just take an SSI check. We decided we wanted to better ourselves. And also we saw we weren't dying, because back then people were dying. When they first started giving us housing back in the early 80s and 90s, we were dying. Yeah. And they used to say, give them housing, because if you don't give them housing, they're going to spread this shit. So they housed us because they didn't want us to spread it, and they were afraid that we wouldn't have anywhere to lay and die. Well, all of us are alive now. I'm alive. You see, I'm standing before you, and I ain't going nowhere. but there was a time there all were sick. Some of us were in the hospice. I was in the hospice. There was a time I went through death. I can remember being even 50 pounds at one time in a hospice with 2 children, being told, you're going to die. Look at her. Her children are going to be just like her. You need 1 year to get housing, to get out of hospice, to get well, and to go through the loop of getting Section 8 housing. Back then, we had something called HAPWA. HAPWA was something that helped people who had HIV and AIDS get housing. It isn't as usable as it used to be. It used to be that our rent paid instantly. We would get our lights and gas. HAPWA has changed because of funding and budget cuts. But HAPWA was a big thing then that we got. And Section 8 we used to get through HIV service agencies like APLA, places like Minority AIDS. Those were some of
Alicia, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, because everything you're saying is just so intensely important, and like from so many perspectives. It's just that you're kind of cutting out a lot, and so I don't want to like miss what you're saying in the recording. So okay. I don't know whether how to kind of remedy that, but I feel like I can hear you better now. You were talking about HAPWA and how that became underfunded, and that there were other programs that were in place that are no longer?
We had minority AIDS, which is still around, but it is not as valuable as it used to be because funding was cut in that. We weren't needing support groups like we needed. They weren't able to get housing money. We had APLA, which is still existing. APLA was basically a white-driven organization.
Mm-hmm.
You did not have many Blacks there, but there were a few. And what I liked about APLA was the white gay males, they would take you aside and say, let me teach you how to live, girl. But that was an organization that used to help. It helps people, but it cannot give Section 8 certificates anymore. They're not giving Section 8 certificates like they used to. And it's changed a lot. And it's also hard to go into a shelter if you're HIV and positive. How do you take your medication properly? What are you telling the nurse? Are you getting good rest? If you have to go outside at a certain time, you may not get your proper rest. There could be stigma with HIV and AIDS. It's a gamut of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to look at also, we have many people who are diagnosed, but they get the fear and they may turn to drugs and alcohol. They may say, I don't feel I can live. Or they may say, I can't tell my family. Because if you're in a Black family, sometimes you can't share you're positive. You can't, if you're a Black gay male, mama may not accept that. Daddy may not accept that. When I told my parents many moons ago, I was a Pentecostal minister's daughter, so it was not easy to say that I was married to AIDS. And the first time I told my father, you gay, you can't be in the church. So it's hard because how do you tell a church you're HIV positive? The church will usually say, you can't say nothing about this. We'll pray about you, or we don't want your kind around. There are a few churches, but not many. You can't share that well because people have fear. People with HIV. So it's a gamut of what happens.
That's profound. That's whenever I talk to you, you say so much in like the span of like a minute. Like you know, you're coloring this canvas of all these different aspects and dimensions within the experience. Like, you know, what you're saying about like the white gay men that, you know, were like bringing people in, and but even still, there were few Black people in that organization. And then the piece about the Black community and like coming out with this status to your family, and how that is just, you know, we don't talk about how difficult those things are enough, I think. And like building kind of like that safety within Black community, it's there. And I feel like it is something that, you know, we need to kind of grow as not just within the Black community, but throughout. And so I wonder, I have so many things floating around in my mind, but I wonder if you know, might be able to speak about, in terms of like resources and like healing, what do you feel are the sort of areas that we can move to, or what do you think are the things that we're kind of doing well, or that we need to do more of to support Black people who are diagnosed with HIV and AIDS?
I think number one, there needs to be trauma therapy to deal with one's diagnosis. There needs to be more telling people that it's okay to get therapy. Because we as people who are Black, we sometimes are told, whatever happens in your house stays in your house. And I think the therapy needs to be done. I think there needs to be more visualization. And I also need to believe that it needs to change from a death stance to an empowerment stance. We are not dying. We're not going in caskets anymore. We have to empower people to go get an education, to get training. We have to look at, you can do those things. We have to empower that you have to heal yourself inside first. You cannot go and date somebody and you're not healed. We also have to look at that women can have children more better. Women are not passing the virus like they used to. There are pills that you can take where if your system is good, you're taking your medication, you're not passing the virus. But I also tell women, love yourself first. Don't get in a relationship and you don't love yourself, or somebody will see you and know you're needy. And we also have to look at a woman or a man being accepting that they have the disease, but it's walking in wellness, going to the doctor, maybe going to a support group with a person with HIV. Now, I'm not talking about a support group where people are talking about, oh, I'm dying with AIDS and I'm taking 50 million pills. I'm talking about a support group where you're empowering and making it every day and you're uplifting each other. Because, see, we don't have the old support groups like we used to have back then. When we used to meet in support groups, it was about death. It was about Betty died, her children are died. Our support groups now are about life. So we should empower each other. We should help each other get jobs if you can work. And if the person cannot work, maybe still uplift them, because there's some people that cannot work with this virus. They should not be made to feel less than, because there's some people that are very ill in this disease because be it the medication didn't work or the lifestyle, because you have some people that have given up. They're not ready to accept the virus. So yes, you have to empower, you have to change one's lifestyle, you have to get up every morning and say, I'm important. And you have to push yourself, but you definitely have to take that medication, even though you don't want to.
Oh, that's really beautiful. That was really profound when you said that the old support groups were about death, but the new support groups are the ones that have emerged since that period of the 80s and 90s are about life. And that, I mean, that piece about finding community where you can gain, be affirmed basically in a space where, you know, you're usually combating this stigma, and not just the stigma that you find externally when you go into spaces, but also like that internalized sort of racism and otherism that, you know, that then you have to work through and start, like you said, start with yourself, heal yourself first. And I just love conversations on healing, because I feel like just having a healing conversation on healing is in part healing itself. And I wonder if you could tell us, and this is only if you're comfortable, so please know that, but if you could maybe share with us your path to healing, the path that you made to be where you are now, like such a community leader, And, you know, you mentioned your education. I mean, I know a lot about the work that you're doing, but I know you know, I got a chance to be kind of closer to you. But I know that even since we were working closely together, there's probably new stuff that I don't know. So if you could kind of share with us your path to healing, you know, where you were when it's kind of started, and how you got there, and where you are now.
First of all, my path of healing was to accept, yes, I have this disease, but it was not about death. I had to accept that I had children, which I knew, and I had to take care of them. I had to accept, yes, I may be 50 pounds, I may look a little bad, but I've got to get well. I've got to take this medication. I've got to learn to live, and I cannot allow someone to say to me, you need to be in a hospice or an HIV shelter and live and die the rest of your life. So it was about coming out, getting housing. My first step was supportive housing with my children and my 2 grandchildren, because I was a grandmother at 33. And it was about getting housing. It was about taking medicine. It was about going to those support groups then. It was also about learning to forgive myself, saying, I'm not a horrible person. Yes, you have this virus, but you didn't do anything wrong. It was also about saying I have 2 daughters and how I'm going to tell them to get educated, and I'm not getting educated. And when I started out, it was like, okay, I'm going to get an education and I believe I'm going to die, but I have to show them that they have to get an education, because I can't always be fussing and hollering, you get your education, I'm going to whoop your behind, and you not doing it. So I started my associate's degree, went on to get the bachelor's and the master's. And it was my goal to help people who were like me. I wanted to show them that we could survive. I wanted to be that tough person that could give my children a chance of living. Right now, I work as a community service what they call it, community service worker slash, and I do teach people how to get services. Yes. And I do that for the Downtown Women's Center. It's sometimes challenging. I work with homeless people, and I wanted to do that because I've been homeless, and I wanted to give life to people who have been homeless. And I guess I wanted to deal also with people who were HIV positive. And I've seen that in shelters. Even when I've gone into shelters now, I see people who say, I'm fearful. I'm a transgender. I can't tell nobody I'm HIV positive. I don't know where a doctor is. And it's to sit and talk to that person and say you can make it. And also part of my path is prayer, visualization. I meditate a lot. I have to meditate daily because meditation is a part of me. I take my meds. I do herbs, like different herbal type medications. I do a lot of self-care. I have a husband, and I set boundaries. If I don't want to do something, I'm going to say to you, I'm not going to do it. Now, there was a time that I did not say to you, I wouldn't do it. I'd say, okay, let me do it because they want me to do it. I've learned to say no, but I've learned mostly that this part of my wellness is doing a garden. And it's for walking. I like to walk a lot.
I didn't know that.
But most of all, I like learning from heroes like Angela Davis. I'm reading a book about her now. I like doing activism and housing, which I do a lot of. And I like just loving and celebrating me. because there was a time I did not love me. I hated me. I thought I was ugly. I thought I had nothing to offer, but I learned to love me. That's some of the things I do. And spirituality definitely is a part of my life. I do a lot of spiritual type things.
Yes. I mean, I gotta say, like, hearing you talk about your healing, I just feel like I relate so much to everything that you say. Everything that you said about, you know, meditation, prayer, boundaries. These are like those building block kind of self-care practices and lessons are life-giving. And I feel that at the same time, the way if we were to just go along our way, you know, and not and go with sort of the regular culture around us, we would not have discovered that, because people aren't openly, it doesn't feel like it's part of the fabric of everything that we interact with to develop those self-care practices. And I just kind of, even my own path, I sort of had to learn those things the hard way, it feels like. And so I don't know, I just wanted to share that for me, those practices are so self-sustaining and to help me really heal my racial trauma on a regular basis. Like it feels like it is a balm for the trauma that, you know, we as Black women experience on a daily. And I wonder, yeah, now I'm like, I wonder, like, with your children, because this is something I struggle with. How have you, how are your kids doing? And like, what kind of like healing, you know, were you kind of able to pass on to them? And you know, and maybe they are doing different types of things and they're not like in that orientation around, you know, the gardening and the kinds of self-care that you do. But I think about that a lot with my son. And now I'm like, well, I have this time with Alicia. Let me see if I can learn. You know, have you been able to sort of pass down that wisdom?
They have the wisdom of strength and wanting to work and to give their children better. They're kind of stern like I was. They learned what therapy is. They've learned the gift of reading. They don't get into visualization, but they've learned about what prayer is. They've learned that prayer and spirituality is a very important part of their life. They used to say, Mom, I don't see nothing coming. But now that they've ended up in their 40s, they know what prayer is. They know how to say, Mama, God is going to see you through. So that is something they have to learn themselves. And that is something they've learned. And they've learned even how to tell their children how to protect themselves sexually.
Yes. That's a really important conversation to be had with our children. And, you know, and I know like it's one that people struggle with, but like, I can only imagine. My son he's only 17, but like, you must have so much pride in the way that they are navigating parenting, and of course they're learning from watching us, like you were saying, like, you know, being that example for them to go back to school and how important that was to you. And it's just really beautiful. And I also feel like I should share a little too about my connection with HIV and AIDS, being a Ugandan woman. And, you know, during that time in the 80s, when they did like "We Are the World." Remember that, Alicia?
Yes, yes.
And that, you know, I was just a little girl at that time, but like those were the images that people had of Africa, where, you know, people are dying of AIDS and people are dying of famine, and you know how that affected my self concept. There was definitely you know, the way people think about Africans even now is like not quite what it is to
Good.
be African, or to go to Africa. But it's like what we were fed in the media, how white supremacy characterizes us as Africans and as Black people. And it did hit my family, you know. I mean, it's still a problem in Uganda, the rates of HIV and AIDS. And unfortunately, my uncle, he lived a long life though because of the new medications, but he ended up passing. And then I have other relatives that are living and thriving, even with the virus because of those medications. And I'm so grateful that they came out when they did. But I think one of the things, just to talk about stigma that happened in Uganda, is that while there is stigma, it doesn't feel in the same way as harsh as it does, I think, here, from what I've perceived. And I don't know why that is, if it's just because there's so many folks that have HIV and AIDS. I have to look up the rates. I haven't looked at them recently. But yeah, it's definitely a element that hit our lives, and hit my life, and my family's life. And I think there is stigma attached to people thinking that Africans, you know, and I know it was like, oh, you're from Uganda. Oh, do you have AIDS? Or do people, you know, you know what I'm saying? Like there was just this association that people had that is really harmful. And yeah, so I just wanted to offer that too, just to share with you like that perspective of African.
And then also it was the portrayal that was put out from us, from doctors that talked about Africans. They told us that African people were having sex with monkeys. And we were like, wait a minute, ain't no monkey ain't gonna let no African or anybody else have sex with them. They're gonna whoop you behind. And that was something that was told to us, that Africans were having sex with monkeys, and that's how we had HIV. And we were like, wait a minute, somebody crazy. So those were some of the things we were told. And I remember that was a big thing that came out. And even I remember going to the women's center with some of my African sisters. They had fear that they could not let another African woman from their tribe know they were infected. So the African women would come into the waiting room and they would look around to see if somebody else was from Africa was there, because they didn't want to be outed. So there was a lot of fear with the African women when I went to clinics here. They didn't want to be seen. And they were rejected. I remember from African women were rejected. There was a lot of rejection.
Yeah, I mean, and then like talk about like just the thing of being othered and being stigmatized, and like not only are you Black and you're a woman, but then a lot of sisters, African sisters, they have an accent too. And like it's just really hard, because I remember my dad, you know, he was such a distinguished man, and he had all the education and degrees, and he grew up in a small village in Uganda and ended up going to Harvard Law School, like kind of like just the most amazing path. And then when he was sick, and he had very dark Black skin, and when he was sick toward the end of his life, you know, we had to take him to the hospital. And I could see people when he talks to them, like I could see that they think that he is unintelligent because of his accent. And here he is, this, Harvard Law graduate and did all these distinguished things. But I was scared for my dad in that hospital because they just think, here's another Negro, and you see when that's happening, when people look at you like that and treat you like that. And so I could see why those African sisters were scared, because it's like even the added level of actually being from Africa makes you feel so vulnerable.
And they still don't want to come to support groups even now because of that fear. And that we don't have many African women that come to support groups. Because it's that fear. How are you going to treat me? Are you going to treat me bad? Are you going to see me as disease? So yeah, that's a big problem. And also the problem is getting doctors that can relate to African sisters.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, and that's something that exists for us as Black people too, because it's like, if you want to see a doctor that looks like you might have to look. You might have to look harder, and that might not be readily available. But certainly, I know I feel safer with at least having a person of color, a woman of color, be my doctor.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Why is that? I mean, I know why, but let's talk about that a tiny bit.
I think it's because as Black women, we've been taught to believe anything that doctor says, and you don't question that doctor. But when you're with a Black person, you can sometimes relate, you can be safer. Because I remember during the early AIDS epidemic, I remember I had to get trained as a treatment advocate to take women to the doctor who were like me. And the doctor would say, you need to take this, 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 this. And it was a white doctor. And the women never would question it. They would not say that the doctor was wrong. And I remember the doctors back then would tell the women, you need to get fixed. You don't have a right to have children. You're a disease carrier. And the women listened and did that. Now, sometimes I had to advocate and say, you don't have the right to tell this woman about her body. What do you know about her body? How can you tell her she can't have a child? How can you say she's going to pass on the disease to the child? So the white doctors didn't always know how to talk to us. Even now, when you are going to a white doctor and you're HIV positive, sometimes you have to get them to sign sheets that say you need housing. And they'll be like, well, why do you need housing? Let me see. Let me take you to a psychiatrist. Let me see. I don't know if I'll sign for you. And it's like, the person ain't got nowhere to stay, but you playing with their life. And I remember I used to say to the doctors, how are you going to tell some woman she got to see a psychiatrist and she homeless with HIV? But you saying she's not compliant taking her medicine. Well, how are you compliant taking medicine and you in a tent? So there's problems we have. I mean, and then you go and tell a housing representative that I'm positive and I need a hotel room. Well, you're doing all right. You can stay in that tent. But how am I gonna stay in a tent? And I gotta take medicine and they need to be in a refrigerator. Or I may have children and I'm positive. Because to be real, there are children downtown with positive women, mothers in tents. Nobody's helping them. And that bothers me. If you're a mother and you're positive, you need help. Any mother needs help, really. Yeah. But I think it's a disgrace to see a woman downtown with babies. When I walk to work sometimes in downtown women's, I'm only there once a week because the rest of the time I'm in other shelters all over the city. But I'm seeing women with 5, 6 kids, and some of them are positive. And then I see men laying on the ground, emaciated, with AIDS, and people are walking over them. Nobody's helping them. And you can usually tell when they have the virus, because being a person who's had it and seen people sick, I can usually tell. And nobody's saying, help that person. Nobody's saying, let's get them to the doctor. They're just walking and saying, poor damn fool.
Right.
And I remember 2 weeks ago, I saw a man with AIDS, and they called the ambulance. They threw his stuff on the ground, the fire department did, and they tossed him like he was a sack of potatoes. And I ended up going there and saying, what the fuck's wrong with you? He's human. He's hurting. And the fireman said, he's just a dirty homeless person. And I said, to you, he is. But do you care that he has AIDS? And the person said, no. So things like that, even the fire department not wanting to sometimes touch you if you have HIV and AIDS.
Oh my God.
And there's not enough education with housing professionals themselves. If you live in a building, they don't understand what it is. Even in supportive housing, you may have somebody that's HIV positive. Are you understanding what they're going through? Are you understanding that they may be fearful on keeping housing, or they may get sick?
Yeah.
So it needed to be education. And I think another stigma we face is, okay, we're HIV positive. Do we give away our benefits? Do we go back to work? I ended up going back to work because I like money. I got to be honest. I love money. Anybody who they'll tell you I love earrings. I like trips, and I definitely have addiction where I wear glasses. I have 32 pair of prescription glasses. I like to change up because it's me. And I like to be able to buy a house one day. But it's the struggle of that. Do you give up your benefits?
Yeah.
Do you get stigmatized where you live? Because a lot of places in supportive housing, you start working, you're told you got to go. I was very, very lucky because at Downtown Women's Center, there's a lady named Janine. She helped me. She said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to keep working. I don't want to lose my housing. And she called the Section 8 worker with me, and she said, you know she's working. She's going to be working. And my Section 8 worker kind of scared me. She said, I'm proud of you. She said, your rent is going to be high. Let me call you back in 2 hours. She called me back and said, it's going to be high, but I'm not kicking you off. And that to me meant a lot, because a lot of people lose housing. A lot of people fear housing. They fear telling the truth that they're working. And then how do you tell Social Security you're working? No one educates on how to do those things. No one tells you how to do that. Nobody tells you how to fall out of fear. Like me, I know how to pay my bills. I know how to do it. I know how to budget. But there are people who are positive that are trying to go back to work, and they're scared. You're scared. You go to a housing specialist, and that specialist might say to you, well, you know you're going to lose your housing. If you're told you're going to lose your housing, you might say, I'm not going to work because you told me that. And I have peers now that tell me I can't work because I'm going to lose it all. When they don't understand that there's laws in place that make it where you can get insurance, make it where you can have a threshold and still live in supportive housing or Section 8. And those things are not taught. That is the stigma, part of the stigma we face. Nobody's telling us that. That's part of a stigma. That's a system thing. You have to go through somebody else. I was lucky because of Downtown Women's Shelter. They were able to tell me something. But before, I was just full of fear. Okay, I had to work jobs where I got paid under the table. after a while, you get tired of paying out under the table and you want to do better. So that's part of the stigma. Do I live? Do I stay on my benefits? What about my insurance? And people don't know about that. But there's programs that you can keep your insurance. You can get food stamps. You can do many things, but people don't know that.
I mean, that is so importantly profound, you know, even for anyone who listens to this recording to know in terms of if they're having those fears about, you know, wanting to maybe to increase their income, but feeling too fearful and experiencing too, you know, processing so much trauma, even just the idea of like risking their safety after having been in housing to pursue more. And it's sort of, I think about our earlier part of our conversation when we talked about healing and how, you know, we kind of had to come and find that healing with few people like kind of guiding or few people coming into our lives. And I think that you're one of those people, Alicia, that has come into people's lives to be able to give them that nuanced kind of recognition of, you know what, you can do these things. And there are programs, but the system that we live in, that's how it is. You just have to be, the way that the system works is that you have to be very precocious and willing to take risks like you have in order to fulfill the dreams that you're visualizing and creating. And so I think that's really powerful. I just want to acknowledge that power and to say that, like, even just this conversation is removing that stigma to the whatever degree, you know, and just hearing the strength of your conviction to tell people and to have taken those steps on your own and get you those glasses that you love and have that lifestyle that you want and pursue the things that you know you deserve. And so I'm just really grateful that you are standing in community that way. And I also just want to thank you for the candid conversation that we've had today. It's just so beautiful. And, you know, and just thank you for who you are in this space. And just thinking of, like, is there any one last thing that you want to share before we close out?
Don't let this disease make you a slave of who you are, because it does not own you. You own it. It's also, if you want housing, keep fighting, keep educating, but most of all, love yourself. Celebrate yourself. Yes. Know that you don't have to stay slavery to I can't. You don't have to stay slavery to less income. You can make more money if you choose, but it takes steps. But once you're making that money, save some of that money. Don't just waste it. Be able to budget. Yeah, I like my thrills. I like my things, but I know I have to budget. Budget. Begin to walk in your wellness and to love and respect yourself and keep celebrating.
Woo! That's so beautiful, Alicia. Thank you so much. I just have so much love and respect for you. Thank you for everything that you said today.